here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone here. My name is Ahmed Javed, and I'm the founder of Sitelect Community, the host of the event today, and will be moderating the discussion today. Today is a very special event in which we have invited the global speakers which are well known around the community and has been speaking in a lot of global forums and bringing the experience in the industry more than multi-decades. With that said, I'll just start with the introduction of the community. Here, so today, our topic of the discussion will be the privacy evolution, GDPR, ISO27701, and beyond. Privacy has been a very hot topic these days and becoming a concern for each and everyone around, being an individual, states, corporates, organizations, and so forth. That's why we felt a need to discuss this thing on our forum, and I feel privileged today to announce that we have the globally known names with us today as the panelists, which we will be inviting formally in a second. The very first thing which I would like to introduce to you is what exactly Sitelect is. Sitelect is an independent knowledge sharing community for cyber intellectuals to host seminars, webinars, and panel discussions to spread the domain knowledge among cyber professionals. Sitelect aims primarily on CXOs and senior leaders such as CDOs, CISOs, CPOs, CTOs, CROs, heads of legal and compliance, CEOs, CFOs, line of business leaders, and so forth. And it welcomes the industry leaders from FSI, energy sector, government and defense, health sector, and all the related industries. It focuses on the cybersecurity and data privacy, but also innovation and organizational culture and leadership buy-in needed to survive and thrive. Moreover, it focuses on how a comprehensive GRC programs enable risk leaders, lines of businesses, and the C-suite to mitigate risk, reduce compliance breaches, accelerate digital transformation, and improve business performance. With over 200 members, keynote presentations from experts and thought leaders, and panel discussions covering cybersecurity from a 360 perspective, and hence Sitelect is also referred to as Cyber 360. With this said, I would like to introduce the team, the people who is always behind the scene and contributing and in order to arrange such events. I'm the founder of Sitelect Community, and I do have co-founders, including Qasim, Usman, Usama, and Noor, which are always extending their helping hand in arranging such webinars. My name is Ahmed Javed. I'm a digital transformation executive with a diversified experience covering full spectrum of technology in space, played several roles in different disciplines, and I'm known in the region as a digital trust advisor, cybersecurity strategist. I'm a speaker, coach, and builder of critical partnerships as well. I've been speaking in different forums as well. I can be reached on the LinkedIn link on my profile, which is given on the screen now. Now I will be inviting our guests, panelists, and speakers which I feel privileged today to announce that we have today Mr. Ron Warner with us. Ron Warner has over 20 years of IT and security experience and is a noted consultant, keynote speaker, teacher, blogger, and podcaster. As president and chief security evangelist of Cyber AAA LLC, he delivers awareness, risk assessments, and advising to small, medium, and large organizations. Warner also teaches at Bellevue University and NSA Center of Academic Excellence. Warner has been speaking at RSA conference since 2005 and is a member of RSAC program committee. His crowning achievement was being selected as Air Force Association Cyber Patriot 2014 Mentor of the Year for his work coaching high school cybersecurity students. Warner has multiple technology degrees and is passionate about building the next generation of cyber professionals. He can be reached on the LinkedIn with his profile link given on the screen right now. Very warm welcome, Ron, to the panel.
It's my honor to be here.
No,
Thank you.
without further ado, thank you, most welcome. Without further ado, I will move to I'll invite my next guest, who is Mr. Imran Chowdhury. Strive to balance entrepreneurial spirit with enterprise capability for success. Innovative technology leader with proven ability to initiate, develop, and implement programs across a broad spectrum of industries, including telecommunications, financial services, media, consultancy, education, and technology solutions. His specialties are enterprise architecture, information architecture, enterprise GRC, and very particularly privacy, cloud, and data governance. And he can be reached on the LinkedIn profile, which link is given to. Very warm welcome, Imran, to the panel.
Thank you, Ahmed. A pleasure to be here.
I'll invite my third and last guest, who's Mr. Rashid Hidayat. He's a certified and seasoned professional with 15 years of experience with diversifying knowledge and skills in information security, cybersecurity, privacy, risk management, process management, PCM, training and mentoring, R&D access management, and a lot of other disciplines. He's a business enabler with the skill set of problem solving, attention to the details, multitasker. Is ideal candidate for senior management position for different industries. And he can be reached on the LinkedIn profile, which the link is given on the screen right now. Very warm welcome, Rashid, to the panel.
Pleasure to be here.
So without any further ado, I'll jump on the topic today, which is privacy evolution, GDPR, ISO27701 and beyond. In today's digital environment, the impact of security and privacy breaches is clear. Considering the sensitivity related to the data privacy, organizations are looking to prioritize privacy-related initiatives and struggling to implement effective frameworks to obtain required objectives. It is not just to protect their value, and it is to be compliant with existing laws, but also to provide something that is the holy grail for the product, or the service, or the business, which is trust. Trust is primarily the measure of confidence which suppliers and customers ensure to prior engaging with any organization today. Not only organizations, individuals, citizens, corporates, institutions, agencies, and governments want their data to be secured and protected. One instance of privacy breach may result in damages in multi-folds. which includes the loss of trust, which can be the last chapter of any organization in the market, in economy. In order to understand the right strategies to implement the privacy frameworks effectively in your organization, let us hear from our guest experts today. So with this segment, I will push the discussion with posting my first question here. I would like to start with Imran, that how do you define in your own words what is data privacy? What a layman needs to understand about protecting their own personal information?
Okay. So if we take on the regulatory view, so there is two. There is an important part for any discussion is to understand what we talk about, say, for example, privacy or personal data, right? So there's a personal data privacy has 4 components. There is the information privacy, there is a bodily privacy, there's a location privacy, there's a communication privacy. But what is the privacy means is in the regards that when we talk about, especially in today's discussion, is about personal data. Now, it's very important for us to understand the definition first. So the definition of the personal data is that any information connected to an individual, right? And that is the second part is that is identified or identifiable. So any information that is connected to an identifiable or identified individual. And that's also a part about natural person. So there is when you talk about information security professionals, we talk about personally identifier. An identifier could be your email address, could be your phone number, something that is uniquely identified by itself or a combination of the information. So for example, if I say a name of Al Jazeera, you may not, and say someone in Al Jazeera, you don't know who that is. But if I say the Director General of Al Jazeera, anyone can actually find out who that person is. So just having that 2 information, it becomes an identifier. And any information connected to that identifier becomes personal data. So it's very important for us to understand that personal data can be any information, and that is the key. So privacy of that means that if it is regarding any individuals whose any information can be identified to that individual, that is the whole sum of it is the personal data. There is a PII component, identifier component, and there's the information component. And all of that is when you talk about the regulation, talks about personal data. And privacy means is that how, so if I have, say, for example, you give me your passport, right? What can I do with that passport, right? Can I go and travel with your passport? So you have to think about that particular information. Why am I having it? What legal authority do I have to have that data? First is that, right? What is my lawful authority to hold your passport, physical passport I'm referring to here, is physical passport. And what can I do with that? And take the same thing into the digital format. Is what can I do with the information? What allows me to hold your information and what can I do with it? So, and that is what the privacy is all about. Is basically an organization's obligation to make sure that they have a lawful reason, they have a legally they can hold that data and they can do something that is also there. And there is a part about different part of the world that has a regulation around that, whether you need to get a consent or not, and all those other factors that we, I don't know if that is going to be in the scope, but that can be another discussion that we can have.
Certainly, and that's we will be touching upon the later part in the discussion about the consent management and the data subject rights and so forth. But when I want to push the discussion forward in relation to the same definition that as you beautifully define that what exactly is the personal data and what a layman should understand about that. My next question will be to Rashid, that generally it's all about the common concept of securing the information, securing the personal information. And information security is being happen to be the very common subject these days, which has been spoken all around for more than a couple of decades now. What do you think? What is the relation between information security, GRC, and privacy?
So, starting from the definition that Imran sir started, I would translate into the definition that we commonly use in information security or cybersecurity. We always use this term of CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. All we are trying to do to make sure the data is remain confidential. It is available only to the person who has need to know, and it's accurate, right? These are the three simple examples of CIA. In term of privacy, we are adding one more factor, which is privacy. So in information security and data privacy, there's an overlap function. There's a common function, which is information security of the privacy data. So the concept is same. It's only that we have added an additional control, an additional protection for the data, which is PII. And in terms of PII, a simple definition, like Imran sir mentioned, from a different perspective, any information by which either single or in combination, you can identify a person, that's PII. That can be used to identify a person. It can be used to harm a person. It can be misused to utilize in a way that is not allowed or that is illegal. So in general terms, information security covers the privacy part, but now because of the focus of the laws and an additional risk factor that was introduced on the PII data because of the digitalization and every person having a digital profile. So this digital footprint increase, and because of that, there was a need to have a separate domain which covers the privacy alone. But as an information security person, you can always relate to the privacy and the overall control. Now, when coming to GRC, we know that we are talking about governance, risk, and compliance. So if in our organization doing a GRC, they already have a program, right? They have the governance part, they have the control part, they have the compliance part, monitoring part. If they want to introduce privacy in that, all they need to do is to add 2 or 3 more factors in their overall risk assessment methodology and practice, which is specifically relating to regulations, laws, right? And the business model. Because your business strategy, it depends which industry you are working in. Like, for example, if you are in finance, privacy can be related to financial laws. If you are in a service industry, it can be linked to a reputational loss. It can be, if it's a regulated industry, it can be linked to a regulatory fine or penalty, or combination of all three. So when we are doing our existing risk assessment, if we add these factors into consideration, so basically we are enhancing the scope of the factors that are very important in order to calculate a risk and control. We add privacy in that. So for the GRC consultants, for the people who are already doing risk assessment or in the field of information security, is just an addition of few factors which are common and some additional factors which are related to privacy. I hope I answered the question.
Right, indeed, been very beautifully, man, and that's why when I want to push the next, want to take the discussion forward by posting my next question to Ron. That Ron, what do you think? Like, when what is being said is that there's a lot of effort needs to be put in terms of securing the personally identifiable information. What sort of standards and laws are available here in order to, for the professionals and the data privacy expert, or the people who are responsible in the organizations needs to follow as a guideline, which are available that may be different from each and every geography? Please shed some light on this.
Certainly. Well, of course, there's the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. been enforced for over 4 years, been available for over 5 years. And if you look at GDPR, it really created a cascading effect. ISO has their requirements now, their standards with the 27701 and 29100. Both of those provide control frameworks around data privacy, more into the details of specifically what needs to be done. When you look at most laws that are written, whether they're international or regional, they tend to be higher level, not very specific, multiple ways to interpret them. The ISO standards allow for a more distinct interpretation. How do we apply data privacy within our organization? As my esteemed colleagues both mentioned, it often may be very sector specific, whether we're talking financial sector may have additional requirements versus more of a public sector or an e-commerce type of an organization. One point to make about data privacy is that I see it, and it was brought up as much by Rashid, that it's as much of a legal issue. It's about the control of person's information, of their PII. Can I control where it goes? Who can see it? Who can change it? Making sure maybe I'm the only one who can change it, me or an authorized representative. So just understanding that level of control and providing those controls. And that's what the ISO standards do. One other I want to mention, because I'm seeing it's being used more and more internationally, is here in the United States, we have our National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. They developed a privacy framework a number of years ago, and reviewing their website, I see that there is also an Arabic translation to it. So it can be used throughout the globe in developing just a way to enable data privacy within an organization. It needs to be run like information security. You need to have people dedicated to it to make sure there are no gaps, because it's not only protecting the information, but making sure it can be managed. So if someone comes back, and this is an important component of GDPR, if someone says, I want the right to be forgotten, for example, Ahmad, just if I were at the end of this saying, I want you to forget me, erase me. How do you do that? That is a tricky problem, considering this is a video recording and you can't just go, and it's not easy to just remove me from the video. So, but it's having those considerations in place and understanding. So wonderful question. Thank you for it.
Most welcome, and that's very in detail, as you rightly said. Like, there's a lot of standards available which professionals needs to follow or use in order to implement these frameworks in more effective way. But using those standards, it requires a bit of a better level of skills and a good understanding of those standards as well. Now we have another challenge. Being professionals, NIST is being, let's suppose, is being followed more commonly in US, GDPR in the European Union. And now in Middle East, most of the countries, they are coming up with their own privacy regulations, which are not basically something new. These are very much a sort of a variant of GDPR or global standards such as ISO 27701. Imran, would you like to shed some light on, what we came to know is that the Qatar has actually came up with the data protection law number 13, and Saudi is coming up with their own law. They have UAE came up with their own variant of HIPAA as well, which is more talking about the privacy of healthcare information. So what's going on in this? How to handle this cocktail of the standards? Isn't it creating more complexity?
So let's separate this this puzzle into their own boxes. So we have a regulation that is one set of puzzles, right? And regulation, as you rightly mentioned, that there are regulations in the Europe, the GDPR, in the UK, the Data Protection Act, now that they are after the Brexit. If you look at the US right now, there are 5 states that has privacy regulations. If you look at Brazil, it has regulations. If you look around, you will have 100 different jurisdictions that has regulation covering personal data, including Qatar, where we have the law number 13 from 2016. So these are all different laws that's trying to regulate the privacy. Now, that's one side. Now, then we have a framework that Ron mentioned about. So we have the, like, say, privacy frame, NIST privacy framework that is published by NIST. We have NIMITY privacy framework, and we have a few other privacy frameworks. And then we have standards, right? Like ISO standards. So what are each of them really providing? Normally, a standards is normally a control, a certifiable standards like ISO27701, many of you are familiar with, or ISO27701, which we will discuss further. These are standards that is normally an organization minimally needs to accomplish to be certified. This is the minimum, normally the standard considered, that an organization must have to get a certification. Then you have framework, right? Framework provides how to actually achieve that. So when you talk about the NIST framework, in the NIST cybersecurity, we have 5 different domains. In NIST privacy, we have 5 different domains. There's 2 overlap, so total of 8 domains, actually, if you take both of them combined, right? So this actually defines the how to implement that privacy. So the standard doesn't talk about how to implement it. Framework talks about how to implement it. And the law talks about what to do, right? So you have to take that all into the consideration in developing your work. Now, I just want to digress a bit from the discussion and move to what Rashid Bhai mentioned earlier. So privacy is not about PII, and it's not just about CIA. That's the minimum, right? You have to secure any data, whether it's a personal data or any data, you have CIA around it, right? So you have to do confidentiality, integrity, availability based on the data that you have. Privacy actually asks even the question before that. One of the question is, why do I have the data? Right? That's a fundamental question. Why do I have this data? So that is about the lawfulness. And why? Then the second question is, do I need the data? Can I keep the data? Right? Those questions does not get answered by the security. Those are the question of privacy, right? So the privacy, there is an overlap. That in one way, security is superset in the sense that it's personal data and non-personal data. But in another way, privacy is superset because it's not just talking about CIA, it's talking about much more than that, right? So in achieving these things, in the objective of getting that privacy, there are standards that we can use. So many of you are familiar with the ISO 27701, which talks about cybersecurity or information security. How do you conduct the information security? By the way, new version of the ISO 27701 will be published any days for the 2022. And as you can see, the ISO 27002, which basically got published, focus on 4 domains: people domain, organizational domain, facilities or physical security domain, and then technological domain. So if you really look into that, you actually see that ISO 27002 is talking about organizational and technical controls that is defined in, say, many of the privacy regulations, right? So when you read the GDPR, you have here about organizational and technical control organization places. This is where you can take that from. Now, there are a few things that Ron mentioned before. One is ISO 29100, and I'll get back to that in a second, but I'll talk first about ISO 27701. So ISO 27701, which is a privacy extension to the information security standard, is putting that additional control required about on top of the information security. So on top of the information security, what are the additional controls required when you are talking about organizational and technical control. It does not really talk about the privacy principles, which is coming in 29100. So in there, it talks about the privacy principles. And if you really look at that particular family of controls, you will find 29134, which talks about how to conduct a PIA. You will hear about 29151, which talks about a code of practice around the PII, personally identifiable information. Then you talk about also 29184, which talks about how to provide the privacy notice and receive consent, right? So it talks about those standards that minimally we need to cover. So there is a privacy element that we need to achieve from 29100, but on top of the 27001 and 2, we also need to apply 27701, which defines, for example, changes a lot of requirement about your regulatory domain, your organizational plans and policies, and as such to incorporate privacy. And so it provided additional guidance on top of the 27002, but also added 2 areas for controller and processor. So controllers in the privacy domain, for many of you are familiar with, is the party that defines why they're collecting the data and the means of processing that data. Whereas processor is someone who is basically instructed by the controller to do something. So for example, if I'm going to host my data in Amazon Cloud, so Amazon Cloud will become my processor, right? And I'm the controller because I'm making that decision. So in that particular things, what are the additional obligations this controller and processor has regarding the personal data is defined on the 27701, which talks about the rights of the individuals, talks about how to conduct, how to achieve privacy by design within it, providing the principles around it. So basically the collection of the data, and also when you are transferring the data, that transferring is happening between 2 parties, between the jurisdictions. So some of those controls, technical, more of a technical and organizational control that you should implement. But when it really talks about the privacy, pure privacy, then you have to go back to 29100 and take that extension from there to understand whether you are achieving the privacy principles, which is all these laws are based out of. So if you are familiar with the Convention 108 by the European Council, not Council of Europe, excuse me for that one. So basically, the Convention 108 defines that is an international agreement, kind of an enforcement and agreement by the countries who are signatory to that particular convention. They all agreed to these privacy principles. So all these countries that you see regulations coming up, that actually signatories to that Convention 108, which provides those principle-based approach that countries should be implementing through their laws and regulations. So they're all actually getting connected in that sense.
Exactly. I mean, I think that you have explained that in a very comprehensive manner. There are a lot of standards which are of global nature, and one of the best practices which needs to be followed to come up with a more integrated approach. I would say, as you rightly said, that privacy is not only about securing the data. Meeting the compliance of the standard is just the minimum. There's a lot more than that. So being that said, like Rashid, what do you think that when there's a lot being said that there's a securing the information, and when we talk about ISO 27701, which is more sort of information security in general, so there's a lot of, but I found there's a lot of overlapping areas. What's your take on this thing, that when how professionals should consider developing the integrated approach of implementing such frameworks, which helps them minimizing the efforts in achieving those compliances?
See, normally what happens in all the organization where such mature organization, they already have an existing program, right? They have information security program, they have compliance program, regulatory compliance, all these regulated industries, they already have a framework, a governance, a structure in place. Now, when these laws came out, the biggest challenge was how to incorporate those laws or those requirements into existing one, right? Either you demolish everything and you create from scratch, right? Which is not possible. For bigger organization who have multi-country footprint, multiple businesses, this is not possible. All they had to do is to modify their existing program, which covers their GRC, which covers their compliance, which covers their existing information security program, which covers their technology program, right? And then inbuild the privacy part. That's the realistic approach that is taken by all the organizations, because it's not possible to create a separate invest $20 million and create a new program. They have to work with the resources that are available. So for that purpose, the best approach or the ideal approach is to go back to basics. Now, what do I mean by this? Go back to basics mean the first thing that we learn in any organization is data classification. We always learn public data, internal data, confidential data, restricted data. So what do? We add a new field, privacy data, right? I already assume that we have already discussed in previous sessions about privacy impact assessment and the requirements and everything. So I'm assuming that we already know all these things, which my fellow colleague Mr. Imran explained in very much details. So I'm talking about now the implementation part, and the biggest question: how do you incorporate all of them in one place? So first of all, we assess this, right? We create a new data classification field if required. Then we cover the basic element that can be captured or that can be isolated. Because when Ron mentioned, right, I want in privacy, the biggest part is we are giving the data owners a power to actually control the movement of data, right? So in that case, if you have a data of a customer, of a client, and you are accumulating that data over the period of 10 years, 15 years, and suddenly that client comes and say, I take my consent back, give me back my data. So how do you manage that, right? If you have terabytes of data, multiple distributed systems, multiple applications, how do you ensure that you can segregate? So in order to segregate, you have to create this as a basic building block, which can be utilized and can be followed for any law avoiding action. The second part, the biggest chunk, technology. We use applications off the shelf, default products or customized product based on the business model, which were created before. It's not that every other day you get a new application to process your data in your organization, right? It takes over the period of time you invest and companies get this. The second part is to make sure that your platform, your technology support this segregation. Because if it doesn't support, then you cannot follow the rule. You can never comply with the laws. I'll take the same example. I love this example, by the way, Ron. He says, take me out of this video. So if you don't have a technology which can bifurcate all these 4 videos that are showing on the picture on the screen, you can never achieve that. If you never achieve that, you're non-compliant. Then heavy fines. And we know how heavy fines are. So the second part, create a basic building block, go to the technology, revisit all your technologies, see what function, how commingled data is. If the data is commingled, segregation is not possible. But if you can segregate, keep it separate in a basic building block level, you can always remove, you can always separate, so you can always deintegrate. That's the second approach. Now, this is basic infrastructure where you are handling. Now, the third part, governance. You can achieve compliance at any given time. The main part, the most important part is to maintain that, right? So in order to maintain that, GRC comes into the picture. You can achieve that level, you can achieve that compliance, but how do you maintain it? How do you make sure that you have only that data which is required? How do you keep your data updated? How do you make sure that when somebody says, or your business process says that, we don't need the data anymore, you have means of properly destructing that data at the end of its life cycle? So then the GRC part comes. Now, the beauty of GRC is that it can be applied on anything. It can be applied for AML requirements. It can be applied for data privacy. It can be applied for information security, technology, crisis management, operational control, anything. All we need to do is to identify the business model. Which business model we are working? What is the flow of the data? What is the business object? So we always talk about this fancy statement that information security goals or strategy should be aligned with the business strategy, right? That's a very common statement. Everybody heard of it. Now just change that same to privacy. Privacy strategy should be aligned with the business strategy. So if your business model talks about something or want to do something, all your strategies, your technology strategy, your information security strategy, your privacy strategy should be aligned with the business. When you do that, then you are in a much better position to actually do the gap assessment. There are one law or 100 laws. You can do the gap assessment. The first thing, applicability. You identify, laws are generic, but out of those laws, when we do the gap assessment, we can identify what is applicable, what is not applicable. So the part that is not applicable, which is not as per the business strategy or the direction, you can simply forget about it. You don't have to worry about it, right? All we have to worry about those laws or those requirements which are applicable. Now, if we compare all of them, as we do in information security or cybersecurity standards as well, if you compare NIST, you compare ISO, you compare any other document, you can always form a baseline, right? When you form that baseline, that should be your minimum control. And then specifically speaking, you pick up the higher side of the requirement based on the risk level, because we know the penalties are high. We know it can cause regulatory impact. It has caused reputational impact. So what do? When we bifurcate, when we distribute into different categories, we pick up the highest requirement. So out of those 4, 5, 6 data privacy laws, we see which of the requirement is higher and which of them have a higher impact. So based on these 2, 3 factors, we pick up the one requirement which gives you the cost benefit analysis. After doing the cost benefit analysis, which gives you the right amount of balance. I'm not saying that,
Right.
the impact is lower and you spend hundreds of millions of dollars just to implement the higher side of control. So we find the balance. That
Right.
balance will give you the baseline, right? So once we implement that, then we can customize based on the product, based on the implement, based on the geography. Sometime the laws, there are 2 types of privacy laws. One are geography based and other are, universal. GDPR is universal, right?
Right.
Anyway, because it applies on the person, but some of the countries have a localized laws. So if your business is operating in that country, they can have their customized set of controls for their geography, for their business, but the baseline will remain same. So when something new added, a new law comes out, let's say after 5 years, 10 years, you assess against baseline and then you assess the local process. That's how you step by step implement, and then the check and balance, the self-assessment, controls, maturity rating, assessment, and everything follow through, because that's the standard program you already have in your organization.
Absolutely.
I hope I
Absolutely. I
answered the
think that
question.
you spotted on the bullseye that when in the presence of such a cocktail of standards, I think it's a more better approach, like to follow the global standards as a benchmark and use a localized version of the frameworks or guidelines to address the more specific needs of the privacy, complying with your local legislation and regulations. And then as you very comprehensively explained about the ingredients of implementing an effective privacy framework, Of course, the GRC is the mother process, I would say, which defines the process, accountability, ownership, direction, and the heart or the blood, I would say, of this whole process of privacy management is the data. How do we classify and manage the data? Now, Ron, in this whole thing, what has been said by Imran and Rashid, there is a very important element which generally is not been discussed when we discuss about information security or GRC, which specifically is related to the privacy, which is the legal part. What is the role of legislators and the related regulators when any organization face a privacy breach?
Oh, so I am not an attorney, a lawyer, nor do I pretend to be one, just to caveat that. But having studied this, being knowledgeable about it, as both Imran and Rashid mentioned, it's being aware of the laws, not necessarily that could impact you, maybe having that list of the rules. And that was actually one of the steps. So you understand the data, and then you understand the compliance, the governance that is required. Ignorance of the law is no excuse in almost every jurisdiction. So if there is that inevitable breach, and it can happen to any organization, and it can be as much of a human mistake as it could be an evil hacker, if you will, it could be someone accidentally sending PII to the wrong email address that then triggers the requirement of notification. Work with attorneys. Make sure the attorneys you work with as an information security data privacy professional are aware of the laws, and you practice it. Run through different tabletop exercises. Pretend you have this type of an event. So this way you are able to respond. You're not reacting, which is negative, but you have a response plan. Maybe you have a checklist already in place. This way, when it happens, you can follow it. Or if you have someone there who's not knowledgeable, but is required to follow. This way they know what to do. There's 3 R's we should be aware of with a breach. There's the regulation. We've been mentioning all of the different laws, being aware where you need to comply. There's the reputation. How does this hurt your brand, your organization in the industry? And it's not always just business to consumer. I still shop at many retail establishments that have had a data breach. That has not stopped me. Where the reputation is a challenge is business to business. It's harder for business who has been breached to do business. They may have additional requirements to prove they have information security and data privacy in place. And then the 3rd R, so we have the regulation, and then there's revenue. And this often is what grabs the attention of business leaders, because this is as much an economics problem. And listening to Imran and Rashid, it's wonderful to hear we are speaking the same language no matter where in the world we may be. That is phenomenal for my ears. But we're talking often about economics. How will this affect the financial part of our organization? And that's often what catches the organization's attention. Saying you're not compliant, some people may not care. Where you say it's going to cost the organization this much money, that will catch their attention, and then they're more likely to listen. One other part about data privacy is associated particularly with breaches is having the transparency about it. Being upfront with your privacy policy and establishing those privacy expectations on the front end. And that way, if there is an incident, you can fall back on that. So it all starts, I loved it when you said it, Rashid, having fundamentals in place. So going back to those basics will save an organization at no matter any stage. Thank you for that question.
So Ron, how about when you mentioned the 3R principle, which is revenue and the regulator, how about the risk of losing the reputation? reputation part is, which is very unique to the privacy breach.
Yes. So that could cause an individual not to use that establishment anymore. Or again, it creates an additional risk because the impact. So just going with very simple risk equations, if you've had an event, the likelihood is high for you. The impact is the revenue. So directly it goes into a risk definition and a risk equation where you can actually begin to quantify risks. Quantifying risks is kind of the nirvana of what we're trying to do. Too many organizations still use a qualitative approach. Being able to take it and use exact amounts is what can bring about that data scientist to be able to allow business leaders to make those risk-based privacy decisions where you can actually show the actual damage to the organization.
Exactly. So when considering the last few minutes left, we are last 7 minutes left for the session. So before we conclude the session, I would like to request three of you to what are your final takeaways? What participants should take away from this message, this session? What they can take back to their organizations and start implementing the privacy? Let's start from Imran.
I think what Rashid Bhai mentioned is very much important, that you have to start from the basic. You have to start from what you have. And fundamentally, if you don't have, at the minimum, the organization, to be able to protect itself, they have to have the inventories of information that they have. What are they trying to protect? So that's the minimum every organization should know, whether information asset, moving into more into information itself that you have. So make that inventory. That's the first and foremost. Once you know that your inventories, once you know what you have, then we can have two-prong attack. One is, how do I secure it? Second is, why do I have it, right? What can I do with it? So that is a two-prong attack that you can do. And at the end, actually, this also connects back to the GRC, because if you don't have some level of organizational governance, risk, and compliance, then there is a danger of not having a clear picture. First of all, not understanding the right level of risk that exists in the organization. And as Rashid Bhai mentioned, that you may actually invest in the wrong things, not being able to prioritize what you really need more protection, what you need less protection on. So again, I'll go back to because there is no single solution that fits everyone. You have to look at your own organization, see your maturity around the GRC, see your maturity around the information security, and then try to use the privacy as a bridge between the two. If you don't have that already, if there is no bridge, you can use the privacy to bridge it, because privacy does bring about organizational risk a lot more also, because it's a regulatory risk a lot more coming in. But information security so far did not have as much. There are some jurisdictions that have it, but it's not as much of a regulatory risk, except for some jurisdictions, some specific set of data, and there are risks definitely exist around that. But so you have to basically take that approach, take your organizational risk, and move from where you are and develop those capabilities and connect these three, as Rashid Bhai mentioned, that connect your information security, governance, risk and compliance with the privacy risk, governance, risk and compliance, and enterprise risk, governance and compliance. Try to put all of them on the same level of cooperation, coordination, and basically strategy.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Imran. So, Rashid, final takeaway message from your side.
Well, I would say either you are in technology domain, you are in privacy domain, you are in information security domain, you are in a crisis management side. We did not touch about that side, but that is more important. Ron mentioned it in just the crisis incident recovery part, but crisis management and business continuity is one of the biggest factor in handling the incident, because many organizations get fined just because they did not handle the incident properly. They may have a good, excellent practice, good privacy program, but when the incident happened, nobody knew what to do, right? Business leader didn't know what to do. So in a nutshell, I would say, regardless of which domain you belong to, understand your business model. That's the fundamental requirement for you to excel in your domain. Because if you don't understand your business model, you cannot understand the true risk that lies with that business and the true impact of these requirements, be it cybersecurity, be it information security or data privacy. And then in order to have an effective GRC program, you will excel if you understand ins and outs of your business model, where the data is coming from, where it's stored, why you need that data, what is the impact, how business get revenue from it, you know. So all of these, because ultimately our goal is to provide services to our clients, our customers, right? That's why the companies do business. And that's how we become the business enablers. So instead of creating privacy, GRC, cyber technology as a business roadblocker or biggest enemies, if we do this, we become the biggest friend of the business. We will become the trusted advisors. And that's how we can excel, and that's how we can grow and mature these programs in any organization. I think that's about it.
Thank you very much. Ron, your last message.
We've learned so much. I'm always learning. So I will encourage those who are watching this to continually be learning, whether it's about the basics, using the references, learning, and I'm so glad you said it, Rashid, about talking with the business, understanding business. So often those in cybersecurity, we think it's all about the technology. It's not. Don't forget people and process. Learn your business. This means getting out of your comfort zone, understanding why they're in business and how it can now impact data privacy. I recommend joining Cytelec to continue the journey of sharing information. There is so much to know about data privacy. We've just scratched the surface in today's short webinar. So I look forward to meeting others and meeting you in future collaboration sessions like this and continue learning together so we can join hands and protect information security and data privacy. So thank you again, Amjad, for having me.
It's indeed our pleasure. So thank you very much for Ron, Imran, and Rashid for joining the session today. We all learn from each other. That's exactly the way we have been made by our Creator. So what we understood is that privacy is alongside the GRC and information security, cyber resilience, and crisis management, and a lot of other stuff. Privacy itself as well is an important component of any organization to ensure the trustworthy relationships with their suppliers and customers, and not only for the organizations, since it impacts individuals, citizens, states, governments, and so forth. That's why everyone have to make sure that their personally identifiable information needs to be adequately protected and secured, so that if you one day you think that you want yourself to be eliminated from this world, as Ron mentioned, you should be able to do that. With this said, thank you very much once again for the participants who joined the session. And I would like to request them to stay connected for the next upcoming sessions. And please join the Cytelec community on the LinkedIn, which basically will be keep posting for the updates for the new sessions. Thank you very much and have a lovely day, night, or afternoon ahead. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.